A famous dancer forced a janitor to perform in front of thousands, just to humiliate him and go viral. She thought she was untouchable. So when the man in overalls slowly removed his rubber gloves and stepped toward center stage, she laughed and told the crowd to get their phones ready. She didn't know she was staring at a former professional who had once made audiences around the world weep, and whose 3-minute performance was about to end her reign of cruelty forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe talent can hide in the most unexpected places, subscribe for more. The mop moved in 3/4 time. Jacob Whitson didn't notice anymore. After 6 years of cleaning floors at the Riverside Performance Center, the unconscious rhythm had become as natural as breathing. His strokes swept in perfect arcs across the marble lobby, each motion flowing into the next with an efficiency that had nothing to do with janitorial training and everything to do with muscle memory buried so deep he couldn't silence it even if he tried. The morning shift started at 5, before the dancers arrived, before the administrators unlocked their offices, before anyone could see him and wonder why a man pushing a cleaning cart moved like he was dancing with it. He preferred the emptiness, the silence, the way the building felt like a sleeping giant, all that potential energy waiting to explode into movement and music and art. He paused near the main theater doors, pressing his palm flat against the wood. Inside, he knew the stage lights were dark, the seats empty, the air still holding yesterday's applause like a ghost that refused to leave. The regional finals of the National Dance Championship would begin in 3 days. Already the building hummed with preparation, extra security, technical crews, journalists requesting credentials. Jacob had cleaned every inch of this place. He knew which floorboards creaked in the East Wing, which bathroom faucet dripped no matter how many times maintenance fixed it, which corner of the backstage area still smelled faintly of rosin and sweat from decades of performances. He knew this building better than the performers who graced its stages, and he preferred it that way. His radio crackled. "Jacob, we need you in Studio B." Someone spilled an entire smoothie. He thumbed the response button. "On my way." The walk to Studio B took him past the wall of photographs. Decades of performances immortalized in black and white and color, dancers frozen mid-leap, their bodies defying gravity in ways that made audiences believe in magic. Jacob kept his eyes forward. He'd learned years ago that looking too long at those images stirred something in his chest that was better left sleeping. But today, his gaze caught on one frame near the end of the hall. A younger photograph, maybe 15 years old, showing a male dancer in mid-rotation, his body a perfect spiral of controlled power. The image was slightly blurred from motion, the dancer's face obscured by the angle of his turn. Jacob's left ankle throbbed, the way it always did when the weather changed or when his body remembered things his mind tried to forget. He kept walking. Studio B was empty except for the smoothie. A pink explosion across the sprung wood floor that would require careful cleaning to avoid damaging the surface. Jacob retrieved his supplies and knelt, working methodically, protecting the floor that had supported thousands of dancers with the same care a surgeon might show an operating table. His phone buzzed. A photo appeared on the screen. Emma, age 7, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile, holding up a drawing of 2 stick figures dancing together. One was clearly meant to be her, wild curly hair and all. The other was taller, holding what might have been a mop or might have been a dance partner's hand. "Made this for you, Daddy. Miss Patterson says I have natural turnout. Is that good?" Jacob smiled despite himself. He typed back, "That's very good, sweetheart. Save me a dance tonight." He slid the phone back into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the worn photograph he kept there always. Claire's face smiled up at him from the creased paper, her dancer's posture evident even in a casual snapshot. Her eyes holding that particular light that had first made him stumble over his own feet at a competition in Boston 12 years ago. She would have loved seeing Emma discover movement. She would have been the one teaching her, spinning her around the living room, turning every ordinary moment into a chance to dance. But Claire had been gone for 5 years now, and the spotlight that had once felt like sunlight had become something Jacob associated with loss rather than glory. He had made his choice: anonymity over artistry, safety over being seen. The studio door opened and 2 young dancers entered, stopping short when they saw him. "Oh, sorry," one of them said, already looking past him toward the mirror. "We have this space reserved at 7. Jacob checked his watch. 6:53. "Almost done," he said, rising with a smoothness that made the dancer glance back at him with a flicker of confusion before dismissing it. He gathered his supplies and moved toward the door, but as he passed, music began pouring from the portable speaker one of the dancers had connected. A contemporary piece, heavy with strings and aching with the kind of melodic longing that used to make his body respond before his brain could intervene. His shoulder rolled back involuntarily. His weight shifted to the balls of his feet. For one heartbeat, he felt the ghost of who he used to be rise up like a tide. Then he gripped the mop handle tighter and walked out. The hallway swallowed him back into invisibility, just the way he needed it to. He had 3 more hours before his shift ended. Then he'd pick up Emma from school, help her with homework, make dinner, listen to her chatter about dance class and friends and the million small dramas of second-grade life. That was his world now. That was enough. Behind him, the music swelled and faded as the studio door swung shut. Jacob kept walking, his footsteps falling in perfect rhythm with a beat only he could hear. The unconscious grace of a man who had once made audiences weep, moving unnoticed through the temple of other people's art. The photograph in his pocket pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. Claire smiled from the creased paper, frozen forever in a moment before everything changed, before the accident, before the hospital, before Jacob learned that the spotlight could illuminate the best moment of your life and the worst within the same unforgiving glare. He pushed his cart toward the next task, invisible as always, carrying his secrets like weights he'd grown too accustomed to notice. The building was waking up around him now. Soon it would be full of dancers and dreamers and people who believed that art was worth any sacrifice. Jacob had believed that once too. Now he just mopped the floors and kept his head down and waited for 3:15, when Emma would run into his arms and make everything else fade into background noise. That was enough. It had to be. The whisper traveled through the building faster than any official announcement could. "She's here." 2 words, and suddenly the energy in every hallway shifted. Backs straightened. Voices dropped. The casual atmosphere of a Tuesday morning rehearsal day evaporated like water on a hot stage light. Jacob noticed it first in the behavior of the other maintenance staff. Tommy, who usually lingered near the vending machines on his breaks, suddenly found urgent work in a storage closet. Diane from the front desk applied fresh lipstick with trembling fingers while simultaneously pretending she wasn't looking at the main entrance. Even the security guard, a retired police officer who had seen everything, adjusted his posture and smoothed down his uniform. Through the glass doors, a white SUV pulled into the reserved parking space. The one marked Artist Courtesy, that was technically meant to rotate between performers but had somehow belonged exclusively to one person for the past 2 years. Kendra Baker had arrived. She emerged from the passenger side like a queen stepping onto conquered territory, designer sunglasses hiding eyes that everyone knew missed nothing. Her blonde hair fell in calculated waves that probably required 2 hours and 3 stylists to appear effortless. She wore athletic where that cost more than Jacob's monthly rent, a matching set in pristine white that seemed to glow against her spray-tan skin. Behind her, 3 dancers unfolded from the vehicle in synchronized motion, each one beautiful and polished and utterly interchangeable. her backup troop, her witnesses, her court. Jacob pushed his cart toward the east corridor, trying to become invisible in the way he'd perfected over years of practice. But he couldn't help watching through the reflection in the polished windows as the entourage swept through the lobby. "Good morning, Miss Baker." Diane's voice carried across the marble, pitched high with nervous enthusiasm. "Studio A is ready for you. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? We have that coconut water you like. Did anyone use the studio this morning?" The question cut through Diane's chatter like a blade. Kendra hadn't removed her sunglasses, hadn't slowed her stride, hadn't even glanced at the woman addressing her. "I know, we kept it clear, just like you requested." "Good." And she was past, her entourage flowing behind her, leaving Diane standing alone at her desk with a hospitality smile frozen on her face and something wounded flickering in her eyes. Jacob had seen this before. Everyone who worked at the Riverside Performance Center had seen it. Kendra Baker didn't acknowledge people who couldn't advance her career or enhance her image. They simply didn't exist in her field of vision. He continued toward the east corridor, but the building's layout meant his path ran parallel to hers. Through doorways and windows, he caught fragments of her procession through the venue. Near the costume workshop, a young seamstress pressed herself against the wall to let the group pass. One of Kendra's backup dancers, a sharp-faced woman with her dark hair pulled into a punishing bun, looked the seamstress up and down and whispered something that made the others laugh. The seamstress's face reddened, her hands clutching a half-finished costume like a shield. Outside Studio C, two teenage dancers who had arrived early for a youth workshop stopped mid-conversation. Their eyes went wide with recognition. "Oh my God!" One breathed. "That's her. That's actually her." They fumbled for phones, but Kendra's gaze swept over them with the dismissive assessment of someone cataloging irrelevant objects, and the girls' excitement curdled into something more uncertain. They didn't take the photo. They didn't even say hello. They just watched her pass, starstruck and somehow diminished. This was Kendra Baker's power. She didn't need to speak to control a room. She simply existed at its center, and everyone else arranged themselves around her gravity, hoping to be pulled closer, terrified of being cast out. Jacob knew the statistics even though he tried to ignore them. 4.2 million followers on social media. A verified account with a blue checkmark that seemed to grant its own form of authority. Viral videos that accumulated views in the tens of millions, some showcasing her admittedly impressive technique, others featuring moments that made Jacob's stomach turn. He'd seen one, months ago, shared by a parent in the dance community. Kendra standing over a crying student, maybe 12 years old, berating her for a misstep. "If you can't handle criticism, you don't belong in this art form," she'd said, while the camera captured every tear rolling down the child's face. The caption had read, "Real coaches create real dancers. Soft parenting creates soft failures. Hashtag tough love, hashtag dance life." The video had 3 million likes. That was the world now, Jacob supposed. Cruelty rebranded as authenticity. Humiliation packaged as motivation. And audiences who couldn't look away from the wreckage. He turned down the maintenance corridor, but not before catching one final glimpse of Kendra entering Studio A. She paused at the door, finally removing her sunglasses, and surveyed the space like a general inspecting a battlefield before conquest. One of her dancers rushed to connect a phone to the studio speaker system. Another began filming. Everything was always filmed, while the third adjusted the lighting to something more flattering for the camera. The door closed, and Jacob felt the building exhale. "She's something, isn't she?" He turned to find one of the younger janitors, a college kid named Derek who worked weekends, standing nearby with a trash bag slung over his shoulder. "Something," Jacob agreed neutrally. My sister's kid takes classes at her academy. Derek shook his head. Says half the students are terrified of her and the other half worship her. Like a cult, almost. But parents keep paying because she gets results. Her students win competitions. Winning isn't everything. Derek laughed, but it was hollow. Try telling that to the parents shelling out $500 a month for private lessons. They'd let her feed their kids to wolves if it meant a trophy. He moved on, leaving Jacob alone in the corridor with the muffled thump of bass coming through the studio walls. Kendra's rehearsal had begun. Even from here, even through layers of concrete and insulation, the music felt aggressive, demanding, hungry. Jacob thought of Emma, sitting in that same woman's classroom twice a week, learning to dance under the supervision of someone who saw students as content and criticism as currency. His daughter came home happy. So far. She chattered about positions and routines and how Miss Kendra said she had potential. Potential. Such a dangerous word in the wrong mouth. A hook disguised as a compliment. A leash made of praise that could be yanked away at any moment. Jacob gripped his mop and pushed forward, burying the unease beneath the rhythm of work. There was nothing he could do. Kendra Baker existed in a world he'd deliberately exited. Their orbits would never truly intersect. He believed that completely. He was wrong. The main stage was supposed to be empty until noon. Jacob had checked the schedule 3 times before wheeling his cart through the service entrance. Competition setup wasn't until tomorrow, which meant today offered a rare window to deep clean the performance floor. The kind of meticulous work that required solitude and time, buffing away scuff marks and treating the wood with the specialized solution that kept it responsive under dancers' feet. He had been at it for nearly an hour, working in methodical rows from upstage to down, when the house lights blazed to life without warning. Jacob froze, mop in hand, suddenly illuminated like an actor who had wandered onto the wrong set. Need the full stage for blocking, and I don't care what the schedule says. Do you know how many followers are waiting for this content? Kendra's voice preceded her through the wings, sharp and certain. She emerged onto the stage with her phone already raised, filming her own arrival, narrating to an invisible audience. Okay, loves, we're here at the Riverside Performance Center, where the regionals are happening this weekend. I pulled some strings to get us early access to the main stage and... She stopped. The camera stopped. Her eyes found Jacob standing center stage in his gray uniform, mop handle gripped in yellow-gloved hands, frozen in the spotlight like a deer caught in headlights. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Irritation, certainly. He was ruining her shot. But then her expression shifted as recognition clicked into place. Wait. She lowered the phone slightly, studying him. I know you. Jacob's stomach dropped. He shook his head, already stepping backward, already reaching for the invisibility that had protected him for years. Sorry. I'll get out of your way. No, no, no. She moved toward him with the predatory grace of someone who had spotted weakness. You're Emma's dad, little Emma Whitson, from my Tuesday through Thursday junior class. He stopped, retreating. Hearing his daughter's name in that mouth felt like a violation. She's a sweet kid, Kendra continued, and the way she said sweet made it sound like a diagnosis of terminal illness. Shows up every week in those sad little hand-me-down leotards. Tries so hard. She tilted her head, examining Jacob with new interest. I always wondered what the story was. Single dad, right? Doing his best. Her backup dancers had filtered onto the stage behind her, taking positions like witnesses at an execution. One of them was already filming again. The house seats beyond the stage lights were filling too. Crew members, other performers, people drawn by the commotion. Jacob counted at least 50 faces before he stopped counting. I need to finish cleaning. he said, keeping his voice flat. Neutral. Invisible. I'll come back later. But you're already here. Kendra smiled, and it was the smile from her videos, the one that preceded tears. And I just had the best idea. My followers are always asking me to feature real people, you know? Not just dancers. Regular people. She said regular people the way someone might say exotic insects. I don't. It'll be fun. She turned to address the growing audience, raising her voice to performance volume. What do you guys think? Should we give Emma's dad his moment in the spotlight? A ripple of uncertain laughter moved through the crowd. Some people clapped. Others shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The backup dancers grinned and nodded like bobbleheads, their phones capturing everything. Jacob tightened his grip on the mop. I appreciate the offer, but I'm working. If you'll excuse me. Oh, come on. Kendra stepped closer, and now she was addressing her phone's camera as much as him. You're telling me you've never wanted to dance? You work in this beautiful venue, surrounded by art and movement every single day. Some of it must have rubbed off. It hasn't. Everyone can dance. She gestured expansively, playing to her invisible millions. That's what I teach my students. That's my whole philosophy. Dance isn't just for professionals. It's for everyone. Even janitors. The word landed like a slap. Even janitors. As if his profession placed him somewhere slightly below human. As if mopping floors was a character flaw he should be ashamed of. The audience had grown to nearly 100 now. Word was spreading through the building. Jacob could see staff members he recognized gathering in the wings, their faces a mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. I really need to get back to work. He turned toward his cart, toward escape, toward the anonymous corridors where no one looked twice at a man in a gray uniform. Wait, wait, wait. Kendra's hand closed around his arm. He stopped, looked down at her fingers, looked up at her face. Something in his stillness made her let go, but she recovered quickly, laugh bright and brittle. You can't leave now, she said. The camera's rolling. My followers are watching. And I promise this is going to be amazing content. Heartwarming even. Everyday hero gets his moment to shine. She made a frame with her fingers, pretending to envision the scene. Local janitor shows his daughter that anyone can dance. She'll see this video, you know. All her little friends will see it. Think about how proud she'll be that her dad was brave enough to try. The threat was wrapped in cotton candy, but it was still a threat. Jacob heard it clearly. Emma will see this. Everyone will see this. If he walked away now, he would be the coward who abandoned the stage. The embarrassing father who couldn't take a joke. The sad single dad who couldn't even humor a famous dancer for 30 seconds. And Kendra would make sure that narrative spread. What do you want me to do? His voice came out flat. Kendra's smile widened. Victorious. Just a little freestyle. Nothing fancy. Show us what you've got. Whatever feels natural. She backed away, giving him space, giving the cameras a clear shot. The floor is yours, Mr. Whitson. She made his name sound like a punchline. The backup dancers had spread to the edges of the stage, creating a frame for the spectacle. The audience had grown larger still. Jacob could see faces pressed against the glass doors at the back of the house, phones raised, everyone waiting for the show. He stood alone in the center of the main stage, mop still in hand, yellow rubber gloves bright under the blazing lights. The temple of art that had been his refuge for 6 years had suddenly become an arena, and everyone was waiting for him to fail. The silence stretched like a held breath. Jacob set the mop against his cleaning cart with deliberate care, buying seconds to think. 100 faces watched from the house seats. A dozen phones recorded from every angle. Kendra stood with her arms crossed, waiting. her backup dancers flanking her like sentinels. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," Jacob said, keeping his voice steady. "But I'm not a performer. I'm just here to clean the floors. That's my job. And you do it so well." Kendra's tone dripped with condescension. "But that's exactly my point. I'm giving you an opportunity. A chance to be something more than—" She gestured at his uniform, his cart, his entire existence. "This. I'm happy with this. Are you?" She stepped closer, head tilted like a predator assessing prey. "Because I've seen you at pickup, standing outside my studio in your work boots and your little packed lunch, waiting for Emma. And I've wondered what goes through your head when you watch all those parents in their nice cars, their nice clothes, talking about their nice careers." Jacob said nothing. "You must feel it," she continued, loud enough for the cameras, for the crowd. "That gap between who you are and who you could have been. That question of whether you're giving your daughter the life she deserves or just the life you could manage." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, hungry for drama. "My daughter is fine," Jacob said quietly. "She's better than fine. She's talented." Kendra smiled, and there was something sharp hiding in it. "Really talented, actually. I don't say that lightly. Emma has natural ability that I rarely see in students her age. The kind of raw potential that could take her places, competition circuits, scholarships, maybe even professional training someday." She paused, letting the words settle. "But potential needs nurturing. It needs investment. The right teacher making the right calls at the right moments." Another step closer. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Whitson?" Jacob understood perfectly. She was telling him that Emma's future in her academy depended on what he did in the next 5 minutes. That doors could open or close based on whether he played along with this humiliation. That his daughter's dreams were leverage, and Kendra was holding them hostage. "She loves your class," Jacob said, and the words tasted like ash. "I know she does, and I love having her." Kendra turned to address the crowd, arms spreading wide. "This is what I'm always talking about, you guys. Dance is a family. We lift each other up. We support each other." She spun back to Jacob. "So let us support you. One little dance. 30 seconds. Show Emma that her dad isn't afraid to be vulnerable, to try something new, to step outside his comfort zone." "And if I'd rather not?" The question hung in the air. Kendra's smile flickered, just for an instant, before resetting. "Then I guess Emma will have to learn that lesson somewhere else." She shrugged, casual and cruel. "I have a waiting list, you know. 43 students hoping for a spot in my junior program. I hate turning away potential, but sometimes you have to make room for families who are truly committed to the journey." There it was, naked and undeniable. "Dance or your daughter loses her place." Jacob felt the familiar weight in his chest, the pressure of impossible choices, the kind he'd hoped never to face again. He looked past Kendra to the audience beyond. Most wouldn't meet his eyes. They knew what was happening. They were uncomfortable, but they weren't going to stop it. That was the thing about spectacles. Everyone wanted to watch. No one wanted to intervene. A young woman near the front, a dancer judging by her posture, pressed her lips together and shook her head slightly. Whether in sympathy or disgust, Jacob couldn't tell. A stagehand in the wings muttered something to a colleague, but neither moved. This was Kendra's kingdom. These were her subjects. And Jacob was just a janitor who had wandered onto the wrong stage at the wrong time. The music's all set up. One of the backup dancers called out, waving her phone. "I've got the perfect track. Something fun and upbeat." "Perfect." Kendra clapped her hands. "See? Everything's ready. All you have to do is move a little. Shake your hips. Do a little spin. It doesn't have to be good, that's the whole point. Normal people dancing badly is relatable content. Inspirational, even. Normal people dancing badly. Jacob's left ankle throbbed, the old injury awakening like a memory made of pain. He thought of Emma, her gap-toothed smile in the photograph, her excitement after every class, the way she practiced her positions in the living room, serious and focused, asking him if she was doing it right. She loved dance. Genuinely, purely loved it, the way children love things before the world teaches them to be cynical. And she loved Miss Kendra, because Emma was 7 and couldn't yet recognize cruelty dressed in sparkles and smiles. If he walked away now, Kendra would punish his daughter for his defiance. Small cruelties at first, harsh corrections, cold shoulders, the subtle favoritism that would make Emma feel invisible in a room full of students. Then bigger ones. A spot lost in the recital. A recommendation not given. The slow, systematic destruction of a child's confidence. All because her father wouldn't play the fool. But if he danced badly, if he gave Kendra the content she wanted, the humiliation she craved, that video would follow Emma too. Her father, awkward and ridiculous, stumbling across the stage while a famous dancer laughed. Every classmate would see it. Every parent. The other students at her school, who already knew she came from less than they did. There was no clean choice. There was no path that protected her completely. Jacob looked at his hands. Yellow rubber gloves, worn thin at the fingertips. The hands of a janitor. The hands of a man who had chosen invisibility as a form of survival. But beneath the gloves, beneath the calluses from mop handles and bleach bottles, those were still the same hands that had once earned standing ovations. The same hands that had caught Claire mid-lift, that had told stories through movement, that had made art out of air and intention. He had buried that man so deep he'd almost forgotten he existed. Almost. Kendra was still talking, still performing for her cameras. Something about how inspirational it was when everyday people stepped outside their comfort zones. Her backup dancers swayed in anticipation. The crowd waited. Jacob reached for his right glove and began, slowly, to pull it off. The gesture was so small that only a trained eye would recognize it for what it was. A ritual. The first step back into a world he'd sworn never to enter again. The rubber peeled away from his skin like a second self shedding. Jacob held the first glove in his hand, feeling the weight of 1,000 memories pressing against the back of his eyes. The fluorescent yellow looked absurd under the stage lights. A working man's armor in a temple built for artists. He reached for the second glove, and time began to fracture. The main stage of the Riverside Performance Center dissolved, and suddenly he was 19 again, standing in the wings of a theater in Philadelphia, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. His first professional performance. A contemporary piece about longing and loss that his mentor had choreographed specifically for his body, his movement quality, his particular way of making stillness feel like motion. He remembered the terror, the exhilaration, the moment the music began and his body simply knew what to do. Every hour of training crystallizing into instinct. He remembered the applause afterward, how it washed over him like warm water, like absolution, like proof that he existed and mattered and had something to offer the world. That boy had believed dance was everything. That boy had been right. The second glove came off. Jacob set them both on his cleaning cart, and the gesture felt like laying down weapons at the end of a war. Another memory surfaced, sharper than the first. A competition in Boston 12 years ago. He'd been 22, already building a reputation, already fielding calls from companies and choreographers who wanted to work with the young dancer everyone was talking about. She had been warming up in the corner of the practice room. A woman with dark hair pinned in a messy bun and eyes that held entire universes of expression. Claire. He hadn't known her name yet, But he'd known, with the irrational certainty of the young and romantic, that she was important. He'd walked over and introduced himself, stumbling over his own words like a teenager, and she'd laughed. Not at him, but with something like recognition, like she'd been waiting for him to finally notice her. They danced together that afternoon. Not for competition, not for audience. Just the two of them in an empty studio, finding the places where their movements aligned, discovering the conversation their bodies could have without words. She'd said afterward that dancing with him felt like coming home. He'd married her 18 months later. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he unbuttoned the cuffs of his work shirt, rolling the sleeves up to his elbows. The old ritual preparing his body for movement. Around him, the present tense continued. Kendra's voice, the murmur of the crowd, the weight of phones recording. But he was still half submerged in the past. Claire, pregnant with Emma, standing in their kitchen with a hand on her swelling belly, swaying to music only she could hear. The way she'd reached for him, pulled him close, whispered that their daughter would be a dancer too. She could already feel it. Claire, in the hospital bed, complications cascading faster than the doctors could explain. Monitors screaming while Jacob held her hand and begged her to stay. Claire, gone. And the spotlight that had once meant joy became the spotlight that had been shining on him when he got the phone call. The performance he'd been giving when his wife died alone because he'd chosen the stage over being by her side. He danced that night. He'd received a standing ovation while Claire's heart was stopping 300 miles away. The audience hadn't known. They'd applauded his passion, his raw emotion, never understanding that what they were witnessing was a man pouring his soul into movement, because he didn't yet know that his world was ending. He'd learned the truth after. The ovation had still been ringing in his ears when his phone lit up with 17 missed calls. Jacob hadn't danced since. Not professionally. Not for joy. Not even alone in his living room when Emma was asleep. He had excised that part of himself with surgical precision, cutting away the dancer like removing a tumor, convinced that his gift was a curse that had stolen everything that mattered. 6 years of silence. 6 years of mops and bleach and invisibility. 6 years of watching other people dance while he stood in the shadows, feeling his body remember and forcing it to forget. And now Kendra was demanding he step back into the light, and his daughter's future hung in the balance, and he had no good choices left. Jacob moved toward center stage. His work boots felt heavy on the sprung floor. A floor designed to absorb impact, to give energy back to dancers, to support bodies doing extraordinary things. He didn't belong here. He was a trespasser in his own former kingdom. But his body remembered. With each step, muscle memory whispered secrets his mind had tried to bury. The way his weight shifted naturally to the balls of his feet. The way his spine lengthened without conscious thought. The way his shoulders settled into alignment, opening his chest, freeing his breath. Kendra was saying something, playing to her cameras, narrating the moment for her followers. Jacob didn't hear the words. He was listening to older voices now. His mentor decades ago, you have something rare, something that can't be taught. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. Claire, the night before their wedding. Promise me you'll never stop dancing. Promise me you'll always remember who you are. He hadn't kept that promise. He'd broken it deliberately, completely, because keeping it hurt too much. But Emma's face surfaced in his mind, and he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to see before. She wasn't just learning to dance. She was learning who she was. And if he let Kendra humiliate him, if he let fear and grief and 6 years of hiding dictate this moment, Emma would learn that her father was someone who surrendered. Someone who accepted cruelty to avoid conflict. Someone who let bullies win. The photograph in his pocket pressed against his chest. Claire's smile. Her eyes. her voice echoing across the years. "Show them who you are." Jacob reached the center of the stage. The lights bore down on him, harsh and unforgiving. 100 faces watched from the darkness beyond. Strangers and colleagues, skeptics and spectators, all waiting to witness the humiliation of an ordinary man. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his posture. Something subtle but unmistakable. The janitor's stoop was gone. The invisible man's protective hunch had straightened into something else entirely. A dancer's ready position. Kendra's backup dancer raised her phone, thumb hovering over the play button. "Whenever you're ready," Kendra called out, sweet as poison. "Show us what you've got." Jacob took one breath, then another, and then he nodded. The music began to play. The track Kendra's dancer had chosen was something upbeat and vapid, a pop song designed for viral challenges and 15-second clips. The kind of music meant to make awkward dancing look even more awkward. Jacob stood motionless as the first beats filled the theater. Then he began to move, and it became immediately clear that he was not dancing to this music at all. His body found a different rhythm buried beneath the synthetic beats. A slower pulse, a deeper current. He moved as if the pop song were merely noise obscuring a melody only he could hear. His first gesture was simple. One hand rising to his chest, pressing flat against his heart, then slowly extending outward as if releasing something precious into the air. The laughter that had been building in the crowd died in scattered throats. There was nothing awkward about this. Nothing clumsy. Nothing that matched the spectacle Kendra had orchestrated. Instead, the man in the janitor's uniform moved with a control so absolute that it seemed to bend the space around him. His arm completed its extension with textbook precision. Shoulder dropped, elbow soft, fingertips reaching toward some invisible point in the distance. Then his weight shifted, and he began a slow turn that exposed the impossible architecture of his balance. One rotation. Two. His supporting leg barely seemed to move while his body carved perfect circles through the air. Someone in the audience whispered, "What the hell?" Jacob didn't hear them. He was somewhere else now, somewhere deep inside the muscle memory he'd tried to bury for 6 years. The pop song faded into irrelevance, replaced by the phantom strains of a piece he'd performed a lifetime ago. A contemporary work about loss, about letting go, about the way grief reshapes a person into someone they don't recognize. He'd danced it 3 days after Claire's funeral. He'd wept through the entire performance, and the critics had called it the most honest piece of movement they'd ever witnessed. Now, on a stage he'd only ever cleaned, those same movements returned like old friends. His body remembered even when his mind had tried so desperately to forget. The contemporary vocabulary poured out of him. A develop that raised his leg to an extension most recreational dancers couldn't achieve after years of stretching. A camber that bent his spine backward in a perfect arc, chest opening to the stage lights, arms trailing like water. His turnout, the external rotation of the hips that marked trained dancers from amateurs, was still remarkable, still present, still announcing to anyone who knew what to look for that this was not a janitor playing pretend. This was a professional. More phones rose in the audience. The original recordings, Kendra set up for humiliation content, were joined by dozens of others, people capturing something they didn't fully understand but recognized as significant. In the wings, a stagehand who had worked at the Riverside Performance Center for 30 years leaned forward and gripped the curtain rod. He'd seen thousands of dancers cross this stage. He'd seen talent and mediocrity and everything in between. And he knew, with the certainty of experience, that what he was watching now was something rare. Jacob moved through a sequence that told a story without words. The pressing weight of grief. His shoulders collapsing inward, his chest caving, his whole body folding toward the floor as if the air itself had become too heavy to breathe. Then the slow, agonizing unfurling, the tentative reach toward hope, the moment of standing fully upright only to crumble again. Because healing isn't linear and loss keeps finding new ways to bring you to your knees. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes without understanding why. Kendra's backup dancers had stopped smirking. One of them, the sharp-faced woman with the severe bun, watched with an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to something approaching alarm. She knew dance. She knew technique. And she knew that the man on stage was operating at a level that made her own training look elementary. The live stream that had been meant to capture humiliation was doing something else entirely. Comments flooded the chat faster than anyone could read them. Is this real? Who is this guy? That extension is insane. Wait, is this actually happening? I'm literally crying. What is going on? The view count climbed. 500, 1,000, 3,000. The algorithm, designed to amplify engagement, detected the surge of reactions and began pushing the stream to new audiences. People who had never heard of Kendra Baker clicked in to see what the fuss was about and found themselves unable to look away. On stage, Jacob completed a turn sequence that would have been at home in any professional company. Shens leading into a controlled pirouette, arms moving through positions with the fluid precision of someone who had spent decades training their body to obey. His work boots were not designed for turning, but he adapted without visible effort, grounding his movement in a way that transformed the handicap into a stylistic choice. He moved downstage closer to the audience, and his face became visible in the lights. There was no performance smile, no theatrical mask. Instead, his expression held something raw and terrible and beautiful. The face of a man dancing through memories he'd tried to outrun, finally letting them catch him. Every person watching understood, on some wordless level, that they were witnessing someone's private truth made public. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't content. This was confession. The first minute ended, and Jacob paused in a tableau that seemed to freeze time itself. One arm extended toward the wings, reaching for someone who wasn't there. His weight balanced on one leg, the other extended behind him in a low arabesque. His chest heaved with controlled breath. The theater was absolutely silent. No one laughed. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Kendra, still holding her phone, still recording, had lost the smug expression that had launched this catastrophe. Something uncertain flickered in her eyes, the first crack in her armor of superiority. The pop song continued its mindless beats, utterly irrelevant. And Jacob, the janitor, the invisible man, the ghost who had haunted this building for 6 years, drew a breath and prepared for the second movement. He was just getting started. The shift came without warning. One moment Jacob was suspended in the stillness of contemporary grief, and the next his body broke into something entirely different. The smooth, legato lines shattered into staccato precision. His chest popped with mechanical isolation, shoulders rolling in waves that seemed to disconnect each vertebra from the next. Hip-hop, street style, a vocabulary worlds away from ballet and contemporary, yet flowing from the same body with equal mastery. A young man in the audience, maybe 19, wearing a hoodie and sneakers that marked him as a street dancer himself, sat forward so fast he nearly fell out of his seat. He knew this language. He'd spent years learning to move like this in parking lots and community centers and late-night cipher sessions. What he was watching was impossible. The janitor hit a freeze that required inhuman core strength, body suspended at an angle that defied gravity, then broke into a footwork sequence so intricate that trying to follow it made the eyes hurt. His work boots, heavy, clunky, designed for mopping floors, somehow became instruments of rhythm, stamping patterns into the stage floor that created percussion beneath the forgotten pop song still playing. Yo! The young street dancer breathed to no one in particular. Yo, yo, yo. It wasn't just that the technique was clean. It was that the style was authentic. This wasn't a ballet dancer dabbling in hip-hop for novelty. This was someone who had genuinely studied the form, who understood its history and vocabulary and cultural significance, who moved with the respect and authority of a true practitioner. Jacob transitioned from a power move into a glide, his feet sliding across the floor in a moonwalk variation that carried him upstage, then launched into a series of two-tang sequences, geometric arm movements that created shapes and illusions in the air. His hands folded and unfolded like origami, each position sharp and deliberate. In the wings, two of the competition dancers who had arrived early for rehearsal stood frozen, their warm-up completely forgotten. "That's professional training," one of them whispered. "That's not just classes. That's years of decades," the other corrected, unable to look away. "That's decades." The whispers were spreading through the audience now, passed from seat to seat like a contagion. "Who is this guy? This can't be real. Wait, is that—" An older woman near the back, a retired dancer who now taught at a university in the city, had pulled out her phone not to record but to search. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing keywords, scanning images, trying to match what she was seeing with a memory that nagged at the edges of her recognition. On stage, Jacob evolved again. The hip-hop elements began to bleed into something else, a fusion that defied easy categorization. Contemporary fluidity merged with street isolation. Ballet extensions punctuated b-boy freezes. His body became a conversation between disciplines, each style informing the others, creating a vocabulary that felt simultaneously familiar and entirely new. This was innovation. This was what happened when someone had mastered multiple forms so completely that they could break the rules with intention, could build something original from the fragments of tradition. A choreographer sitting in the fourth row, she'd come to scout talent for the regionals, felt her breath catch. She had seen fusion before. Everyone tried it these days. But most fusion was just collision, styles crashing into each other without integration. What she was watching was alchemy, pure gold. Jacob launched into a turning sequence that married street technique with classical form. He pulled from hip-hop's grounded power while maintaining ballet's lifted carriage, spinning on his heel in rotations that accelerated until he became a blur, then stopping with such precision that the stillness felt like a thunderclap. Kendra's face had changed. The smug satisfaction was gone, replaced by something harder to read. Her phone was still raised, still recording, but her hand had begun to tremble slightly. She was a trained dancer. She had studied for years, competed for years, built her entire identity around being exceptional. She knew what excellence looked like, and she was beginning to understand that she had made a terrible mistake. The retired dancer in the back finally found what she was searching for. A photograph from a dance magazine 12 years old. A young man mid-leap, body forming a perfect arc against a black background. The caption beneath it, "Rising star Jacob Whitson delivers a stunning debut with the National Contemporary Ensemble." Her gasp was audible. She turned to show the woman beside her, and that woman showed the person next to her, and within 30 seconds the image was making its way through the audience like wildfire. Phones tilted toward neighbors. Fingers pointed. Eyes widened. "Oh my God, that's Jacob Whitson. The Jacob Whitson? I thought he disappeared. I thought he was dead." The name rippled outward, gaining momentum with each whisper. People who remembered Googled frantically, pulling up old videos, old reviews, old profiles of the dancer who had been called a once-in-a-generation talent before vanishing completely from the public eye. On stage, Jacob was oblivious to the revelation cascading through the crowd. He was deep inside the movement now, deep inside a place where there was no audience, no cameras, no Kendra, no humiliation. There was only the body's ancient knowledge, finally given permission to speak after years of enforced silence. He moved through a passage that quoted his most famous work, the contemporary piece that had earned him international recognition, before transforming it into something new, something that incorporated everything he'd become since then. The grief, the resilience, the quiet dignity of a man who had chosen to mop floors rather than chase glory. In the livestream chat, the comments had shifted from confusion to awe to collective revelation. Jacob Whitson is alive. The janitor is Jacob Whitson. This is the greatest comeback in dance history. I'm watching a legend. The view count had exploded past 50,000 and was climbing faster than the server could update. Kendra lowered her phone an inch. Just an inch. Her backup dancers exchanged glances that communicated volumes. They had helped engineer this trap, and now they were watching it spring shut on the wrong person. The first minute had silenced the laughter. The second minute had showcased impossible versatility. And still Jacob danced, building toward something even larger, his body promising that the best was yet to come. The audience leaned forward as one. The final minute began with a breath. Jacob stood center stage, chest heaving, sweat darkening the gray fabric of his uniform. For a suspended moment, he was perfectly still, a calm eye in the hurricane of movement that had come before. The pop song had ended at some point, leaving only the echo of silence and the collective held breath of 200 witnesses. Then, from somewhere in the sound booth, a new track began. Later, the stagehand responsible would swear he didn't know what made him do it. He'd been watching from his position near the audio controls, transfixed like everyone else, and his hands had moved without conscious thought. He'd pulled up a piece from the venue's archived performance files, a contemporary composition that had been used in a legendary performance over a decade ago. The first notes of the orchestral arrangement filled the theater, and Jacob's body responded like a flower opening to sunlight. He knew this music. He had choreographed to this music. This was the piece that had made him famous. His opening movement was deceptively simple, a port de bras that carried his arms from low fifth through first to high fifth, each position held for a breath, each transition imbued with meaning that transcended technique. Classical training announced itself in every line of his body. The precise placement of his fingers, the elegant curve of his wrists, the way his chin lifted to follow the arc of his hands. But this was not merely classical. As the music swelled, Jacob began to layer contemporary elements over the ballet foundation. Contractions that collapsed his center, releases that sent his limbs spiraling outward, floor work that brought him down and raised him up in patterns that echoed the rhythm of grief itself. The audience had stopped breathing. In the fourth row, a woman pressed both hands over her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She didn't know why she was crying. She only knew that what she was witnessing had bypassed her intellect entirely and struck something deeper, something primal, something that responded to beauty and pain and truth without requiring explanation. Jacob launched into the technical heart of the piece, a sequence so demanding that most dancers could only dream of attempting it. A series of grand jetés carried him across the stage, each leap higher than the last, his legs splitting in full extension while his arms reached toward opposing horizons. He landed from the final jump into an immediate turn sequence. Fouettes that whipped his body around a central axis, spotting with perfect precision once, twice, 8 times, 12 times, the count climbing past what should have been possible. The young street dancer in the hoodie had tears in his eyes now too. He didn't fully understand the classical vocabulary, but he understood transcendence. He understood watching someone operate so far beyond normal human capacity that it felt like witnessing something holy. Jacob came out of the turns into a controlled descent, his body folding toward the floor in a slow-motion collapse that told the story of defeat, of surrender, of the moment when grief becomes too heavy to carry upright. He lay prone on the stage, arms extended, face pressed against the wood he had polished countless times with his mop and his silence and his invisible devotion. The music softened. A single violin carried a melody that ached with loss. And then, impossibly, Jacob began to rise. Not with the explosive power of his earlier movement, but with something harder, the grueling, inch-by-inch resurrection of someone who has every reason to stay down but chooses to stand anyway. His core engaged to lift his chest. His arms pressed against the floor to raise his torso. One knee drew under his body, then the other, and finally he was upright again, swaying slightly, a man rebuilt from the ruins of his own devastation. The music built toward its climax. Jacob responded with movement that no longer seemed to obey the laws of physics or the limits of human anatomy. He was channeling something beyond technique now, beyond training, beyond muscle memory, beyond anything that could be taught in a studio or measured in a competition. This was pure expression, pure truth, pure art. He moved through a sequence that quoted every style he had demonstrated, the contemporary fluidity, the hip-hop precision, the classical foundation, weaving them together into a language that was entirely his own. A vocabulary invented in this moment, for this moment, by a man who had hidden himself away for 6 years and was finally allowing the world to see him whole. The choreographer in the fourth row had given up trying to analyze what she was watching. Technical terms felt insufficient. Critical frameworks felt irrelevant. She simply surrendered to the experience of witnessing something she knew she would never forget. As the music reached its peak, Jacob gathered himself for the final sequence. He began with a preparation that every dancer in the audience recognized, the setup for a grand pirouette. But instead of a standard turn, he launched into a rotational sequence that combined multiple techniques. The grounded power of hip-hop, the elevated line of ballet, the emotional abandon of contemporary. He turned and turned and turned, his body creating shapes in the air that seemed to exist outside of time, each rotation adding another layer of meaning. And then, at the exact moment the music hit its final crescendo, he stopped. The stillness was absolute. Jacob stood in a pose that sent shockwaves of recognition through every professional dancer in the theater. His right arm extended toward the wings, reaching for something or someone just beyond the visible world. His left arm crossed his heart, palm flat against his chest. His supporting leg bore all his weight while his working leg extended behind him in a low arabesque, foot pointed, line unbroken from fingertip to toe. It was the pose from the photograph, the famous photograph that had appeared in dance magazines around the world 12 years ago, the image that had announced the arrival of a prodigy, the signature moment of a career that had burned so bright before vanishing entirely. The retired dancer who had searched for his picture earlier let out an audible sob. She had been there in the audience the night that photograph was taken. She had witnessed the original performance. And now she was watching its resurrection, delivered by a man in a janitor's uniform who had every right to be bitter and broken, but who had instead chosen to offer this gift to an audience that had come to mock him. The music faded to silence. Jacob held the pose for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. His chest heaved. His legs trembled from exertion. Sweat dripped from his face onto the stage floor, and those drops caught the light like tears made visible. Then, slowly, he lowered his arms and stood simply as himself. Not the legend, not the ghost, just a man who had finally stopped hiding. The silence stretched. It lasted 1 second, 2, an eternity compressed into a handful of heartbeats. And then the theater exploded. The applause began like thunder, a rolling wave of sound that built and built until it seemed to shake the walls. People rose from their seats without conscious decision, their bodies lifting them upright as if pulled by strings. The standing ovation spread through the house in seconds. 200 people on their feet, clapping and cheering and weeping with an emotion they couldn't name. Kendra stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her phone hanging limply at her side, no longer recording. Her backup dancers had backed away, distancing themselves from what had become career-ending proximity. The elaborate trap she had constructed with such cruel confidence had sprung closed, but not on its intended victim, on her. Jacob stood alone in the center of the stage, surrounded by adulation he hadn't sought and couldn't escape. The spotlight that had once meant pain now washed over him like absolution. The ghost had danced, and the world would never unsee what it had witnessed. The video hit 1 million views before Jacob finished his shift. He had tried to leave the stage quietly, retrieving his rubber gloves and mop with the same methodical care he brought to every task. But the crowd had other ideas. They surrounded him with phones and questions and tears, reaching out to touch his arm as if confirming he was real. The stagehand who had cued the music fought his way through the crowd to shake his hand, apologizing and thanking him in the same rambling breath. Jacob had smiled politely, accepted the attention with visible discomfort, and eventually escaped through the service corridors he knew better than anyone. By the time he clocked out, his phone had 17 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. By the time he picked Emma up from aftercare, the video had been shared by 3 major dance publications and was trending on every social media platform. By the time they sat down to dinner, spaghetti with Jared sauce, Emma's favorite, the story had a name that was spreading like wildfire: the janitor's dance. "Daddy, why does your phone keep buzzing?" Jacob silenced it again, setting it face down on the counter. "Some people want to talk to me about something that happened at work." "Did you get in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. Nothing like that." Emma twirled her spaghetti with the intense concentration of a 7-year-old mastering a difficult skill. "Good. Because you're a good worker. You always say how important it is to do your job right, even when no one's watching." Jacob felt something catch in his throat. "That's right. That's exactly right." They finished dinner with their usual rhythm, Emma chattering about school, about her friends, about the book her teacher was reading to the class. Normal life continuing its normal patterns, even as Jacob's phone accumulated notifications like snowfall in a blizzard. He waited until she was in bed, tucked under her purple comforter with the stuffed rabbit Claire had bought before Emma was born, before he finally looked at what the world was saying. The video had been uploaded from multiple angles, but the most viewed version came from the livestream Kendra herself had started. The comments underneath it were a mixture of awe and outrage. Awe at Jacob's performance, outrage at the cruelty that had prompted it. She literally tried to humiliate this man for content. The way she threatened his daughter's spot at her academy. "This is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen a dance professional do." And she filmed herself doing it? The audacity. Jacob Whitson deserved better than this. He deserves everything. Someone had done the research. Someone always did. Within hours of the video going viral, a comprehensive thread had been compiled. Jacob's professional history, his accolades, his disappearance from public life, the accident that had injured his ankle, the death of his wife. The internet had excavated his tragedy with ruthless efficiency and presented it alongside Kendra's cruelty, creating a narrative that cast him as the wounded hero and her as the irredeemable villain. Jacob read it all with a strange sense of detachment. This version of his story wasn't wrong exactly, but it wasn't complete either. It couldn't capture the mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible, or the nights when Emma's laughter was the only thing that kept him tethered to the world. It couldn't explain the complex peace he'd found in anonymity, the way cleaning floors had become a kind of meditation, the dignity he'd discovered in work that most people overlooked. The public wanted a triumphant comeback story. Jacob wasn't sure that was what he wanted to give them. But the consequences for Kendra were already in motion. By morning, 3 of her major sponsors had issued statements distancing themselves from her brand. Her Dance Academy's website had been flooded with 1-star reviews. Parents were pulling their children from her classes, citing concerns about her treatment of students. A formal complaint had been filed with the Regional Dance Association, triggering an ethics review that could result in sanctions or expulsion. Her social media accounts had gone private, but not before screenshots captured her desperate attempts at damage control. Posts that blamed editing, claimed context had been removed, insisted the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. No one was buying it. The full video, unedited, showed exactly what had happened. Her words were preserved in digital amber. The threats, the condescension, the casual cruelty that she had mistaken for content. Jacob took no satisfaction in her downfall. He understood, in a way the internet didn't, that cruelty usually grew from its own kind of wound. Kendra Baker had built her identity on being exceptional, and that foundation had required her to diminish everyone around her. Her destruction had been inevitable long before he ever stepped onto that stage. But that didn't mean Emma should witness it. He found her the next evening sitting on her bed, tablet in her hands, watching a clip of his performance that had somehow made it past the parental controls. "Daddy," she said, looking up with wide eyes. "That's you." Jacob sat down beside her, taking the tablet gently from her hands. "It is. You were dancing." "I was. You're really, really good." She said it with the simple conviction of childhood, no analysis required. "Why didn't you tell me you could dance like that?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words that a 7-year-old could understand for feelings he had never fully explained to himself. "Do you remember when we talked about Mommy?" he finally asked. "About how she used to dance too?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Dancing was something we did together. When she had to go away, dancing made me think about her too much. It hurt to move without her there. So you stopped. So I stopped. I thought if I wasn't a dancer anymore, maybe missing her wouldn't hurt so much." Emma considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing evidence. "Did it work?" "No," Jacob admitted. "I missed her just as much. But by then, I'd been away from dancing for so long that I was scared to go back." "But you weren't scared yesterday." "No. Yesterday I had something more important than fear." "What?" He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You. I was thinking about you, and what I wanted you to learn about standing up for yourself, and suddenly the fear didn't seem to matter as much." Emma snuggled into his side. "Miss Kendra was mean to you. I saw people talking about it." "She was. But that's not your fault, and it's not your problem to solve." "I don't think I want to go back to her class." "You don't have to. We'll find you a new teacher. Someone who builds people up instead of tearing them down." They sat together in comfortable silence, the tablet forgotten, the world's attention temporarily held at bay by the walls of their small apartment. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to be a dancer again? Like, for real?" Jacob had been asking himself the same question since the applause had faded. Offers were already arriving, interview requests, teaching positions, invitations to perform. The dance world wanted him back with an eagerness that bordered on hunger. But when he closed his eyes and imagined his future, what he saw wasn't stages and spotlights. It was this Emma growing up, learning to dance because she loved it, surrounded by people who nurtured her gift instead of exploiting it. It was quiet mornings and simple dinners and the profound ordinary miracle of being present for the life he'd built. "I don't know yet," he told her honestly. "Maybe sometimes, but not the way I did before. Before, dance was everything. Now you're everything, and dance is just something I can do. That's good, Emma said, yawning. Because I'd miss you if you were always on stages. I'd miss you too. More than anything. She fell asleep against his shoulder, and Jacob sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about visibility and invisibility, about talent and truth, about all the different ways a person could choose to be seen. Tomorrow the calls would continue. The offers would multiply. The world would keep demanding that he step back into the light. But tonight, in this room, with his daughter breathing softly beside him, Jacob Whitson was exactly where he wanted to be. The janitor's dance was over. The father's life continued. And that, he decided, was the only encore that mattered.